In the midst of a dusty camp, two chained boys are displayed in a wooden pen with a sign marking their price at just $1, sold by their own wealthy and powerful father, who treats the poor children as mere goods for being bastards. But there, among the crowd, a white horse silently watches everything, the only one who recognizes the true worth of those children, who are still too young to understand the great injustice they're suffering. What this animal does next will challenge everything you believe is possible. Before we begin, if you love animals as much as we do, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our thrilling stories. Thank you. Now, back to our story. The relentless midday sun beat down on the parched earth as Donovan McKenna stepped out of the stagecoach, his cold eyes scanning the mining camp he had built with his own blood and sweat. Behind him, two boys, barely 4 years old, trembled on the rear seat, their grimy faces framed by tangled blonde hair and blue eyes that reflected a heartbreaking confusion. "Get out!" McKenna ordered in a gruff voice, not even glancing at the twins. Thomas and Samuel hesitated, their small, thin bodies swaying with the coach's settling springs. They didn't understand why the man their mother called father had brought them to this strange place, full of grimy, boisterous men who stared at them with unsettling curiosity. The camp was a hive of activity. Dust-caked miners emerged from the dark shafts like ghosts, hauling heavy buckets of rock and dirt. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, smoke, and something else, the bitter stench of desperation that clung to men who had sold their souls for scraps of gold. McKenna strode to the center of the dusty yard where a group of workers was gathering for their midday meal. His presence immediately silenced the chatter, and all eyes turned to watch the richest and most feared man in the territory. He wore an expensive suit, utterly out of place in the blistering heat, but it served as a symbol of his power and authority. "Jeremiah!" he bellowed at his foreman, a burly man with a scarred face and enormous hands calloused from hard labor. "I want you to build a pen right here in the middle of the yard, something simple but sturdy." The foreman frowned, his gaze shifting between his boss and the boys who remained by the stagecoach. "A pen, sir? For what purpose?" McKenna smiled, but there was no warmth in his expression. It was the smirk of a man who had found a solution to a long-festering problem. "You'll see soon enough, and I want a sign made, a big one, with the number 1 and a dollar sign in front of it." As the workers scrambled to carry out the strange orders, Thomas took Samuel's hand, feeling his twin brother's racing pulse. They had grown up with nothing, but they had always had the unconditional love of their mother, Maria Vargas, a strong woman who worked as a laundress in the nearby town to support her sons. The memory of the previous morning was still fresh in their little minds. Maria had wept as she handed the boys over to McKenna, whispering promises that everything would be all right, that the rich man would take better care of them than she ever could. She had lost her job and had no money for food, let alone enough to raise 2 children on her own. What Thomas and Samuel didn't know was that McKenna had been planning this moment for months. The twins' existence was a stain on his reputation, a constant reminder of a night of weakness that had resulted in unwanted consequences. He had built an empire on fear and respect, and he would not allow 2 bastard boys to tarnish his image. In less than an hour, the pen was ready. It was a crude wooden structure, about 6 feet square, in the exact center of the yard. The sign hanging from the front clearly displayed $1. McKenna observed the work with satisfaction, knowing he was about to execute a plan that would solve his problem once and for all. "Bring the boys," he commanded coldly. And it was then that Thomas and Samuel realized their lives would never be the same. Thomas's small hands trembled as McKenna pushed him toward the pen. The boy glanced back, searching for Samuel, and saw his brother being dragged by the foreman, Jeremiah, who avoided making eye contact with the children. There was something in his eyes that suggested discomfort, but he wouldn't dare question the boss's orders. "No, please," Thomas murmured in his childish voice, trying to cling to the wooden bars of the pen. "We want to go home. We want our mama." McKenna completely ignored the plea, focusing instead on tying coarse ropes around the boys' delicate wrists. The rough material scraped their soft skin, leaving red marks that would soon turn into raw wounds. Samuel began to cry, a low, gut-wrenching sound that echoed across the silent yard. The miners had stopped working and had slowly gathered, forming a semicircle around the bizarre spectacle. Some looked disturbed, whispering among themselves, but none had the courage to intervene. They knew McKenna's reputation. Men who crossed him simply disappeared, and their families never heard from them again. "Listen up," McKenna announced, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "These two brats are for sale. $1 for the pair, or 50 cents apiece. Whoever wants them can put them to work in the deepest tunnels. They're small, they can fit in tight spaces, and they won't cause much trouble." The horror of those words hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. As young as he was, he understood they were being sold like livestock. His eyes filled with tears, but he fought them back, knowing instinctively that crying would only make things worse. Across the yard, a white horse watched the scene with unusual attention. Tempest had belonged to the Vargas family before McKenna took custody of the boys, and the animal shared a special connection with Thomas and Samuel. His nostrils flared as he sensed the children's distress, and he began to shift restlessly, stamping his front hooves. "Any takers?" McKenna asked, gesturing to the twins as if they were goods at a market. "They guarantee years of work in the mines. They're resilient, these bastards." A tall, wiry man with scarred hands and patched-up clothes stepped up to the pen. He examined the boys with calculating eyes, assessing their strength and stamina. "They look a bit frail for hard labor," he commented, touching Samuel's arm as if testing the quality of meat. "They'll toughen up," McKenna replied quickly, "and the price is more than fair. Where else will you find labor this cheap?" Samuel tried to pull away from the man, but the ropes held him fast. He looked at Thomas, and the brothers communicated with a glance that only twins can share. There was fear there, but also a silent resolve to stay together no matter what. Tempest drew closer, his intelligent eyes watching every move. He had witnessed many injustices during his years at the camp, but never anything as cruel as this. His ears twitched nervously, catching every word of the terrible conversation. "I'll take them both," the wiry man finally said, pulling coins from a pouch tied to his waist. "But I want a guarantee they'll obey. I don't have time to deal with rebels." McKenna smiled with satisfaction, holding out his hand to receive the payment. "Leave it to me. I'll personally explain the consequences of disobedience." It was then that Thomas found the courage to speak. "Father," he said, looking directly into McKenna's eyes, "our mama said you were going to take care of us. She said you were our real father." The silence that followed was deafening. McKenna felt every eye turn to him, and for a moment his mask of cruelty faltered, but only for a moment. "I have no sons," he declared icily, his voice like cracking ice, "and I certainly have no bastards." The echo of McKenna's words hung over the yard like a storm cloud. Thomas felt something inside him break, a pain he couldn't fully comprehend, but that made him want to curl up and disappear. Samuel, who had always been the more sensitive of the two, couldn't hold back the tears that began to stream down his dirty cheeks. "There, it's settled," McKenna announced, turning to the buyer. "Take them now before they start making more noise." The wiry man, who introduced himself as Ezra Morton, pulled a long chain from his pocket. The sound of metal dragging on the ground made several miners flinch, unsettled by the scene unfolding before them. Some began to disperse, pretending to have urgent work, but others remained, mesmerized by the sheer cruelty of the spectacle. "Come on, boys," Morton grumbled, fastening the chain to the boys' already bruised wrists. "You work for me now, and you'd better be obedient, because I have no patience for crying children." Thomas tried to be strong, but when Morton pulled the chain hard, causing him to stumble, he couldn't help but let out a whimper of pain. Samuel immediately moved closer to his brother, offering the only comfort he could, his presence. "Stay together," Thomas whispered to Samuel, his words almost inaudible. "No matter what, we stay together." Across the yard, Tempest watched with growing agitation. The horse had formed a special bond with the boys during the few days they had been together on the journey to the camp. He could feel their despair, and something primal in his protective instinct began to stir. McKenna counted the coins Morton had given him, pleased with the transaction. To him, it represented far more than money. It was the elimination of a problem that had haunted him for years. Now he could return to his mansion in town and pretend the boys never existed. "It's all settled," McKenna said, pocketing the coins in his waistcoat. "They're yours now. Do what you want with them." Morton nodded and began pulling the boys toward the mine entrance. The dark tunnels gaped like hungry mouths in the rocky hillside, and the air that drifted out of them carried the smell of dampness, mold, and something more sinister, the odor of death that constantly hovered over the workers in the deep galleries. "No, please," Samuel pleaded, his small legs struggling to keep up with Morton's stride. "We want our mama. She'll be worried about us." Morton stopped abruptly and turned to the boys, his eyes as cold as stone. "Forget your mother. Forget everything you knew before. From now on, you're my workers, and you'll do exactly as I say." It was then that Jeremiah, the foreman, approached hesitantly. He had worked for McKenna for over 10 years, overseeing hundreds of men and witnessing countless injustices, but never anything that disturbed him as much as this. There was something in those boys' eyes that reminded him of his own sons, who lived far away with his wife. "Mr. McKenna," Jeremiah began, his voice hoarse with nervousness, Maybe we should reconsider. They're too young for the mines. They could get seriously hurt." McKenna turned to his foreman with an expression that could freeze blood. "Are you questioning my decisions, Jeremiah?" "No, sir, Then shut your mouth and get back to work. And the next time you think of offering me unsolicited advice, remember how many men have disappeared for much less." The threat was not empty, and Jeremiah knew it. He lowered his eyes and backed away, but not before casting one last pitying glance at the boys being led to a terrible fate. Tempest, who had gradually moved closer, was now near enough to nuzzle Samuel. The boy looked up at the horse with tear-filled eyes, and for a moment he felt a flicker of hope. "He's going to help us," Samuel whispered to Thomas. "Tempest is going to help us." But Morton was already pulling them away, and the last thing they saw was the white horse watching them go, his eyes seeming to promise something they didn't dare hope for. The mouth of the mine swallowed Thomas and Samuel like a giant maw, pulling them into a world of darkness and terror they could never have imagined. The air grew thicker with every step, heavy with dust that made their lungs burn, and a sticky dampness that clung to their skin like a second layer of grime. Morton held a lantern that swung with his movements, creating dancing shadows on the rock walls. The tunnels were narrower than the boys had expected, and in some places, even they had to stoop to get through. The sound of their own shallow breaths echoed eerily, mixing with the constant drip of water seeping from the stones. "This is where you'll work," Morton announced, stopping in a side gallery that stretched for yards into the darkness. "You're small enough to get into the tightest tunnels, where the big men can't fit. You'll grab whatever you find and bring it to me." Thomas swallowed hard, trying to see past the lantern's weak glow. He could hear strange sounds from the depths, the creaking of timber, the shifting of rock, and something that might have been distant human voices, but sounded more like ghostly groans. "What if we can't?" Samuel asked in his trembling voice, clinging to his brother's arm. Morton laughed, a harsh sound with no joy in it. "Then you'll learn quickly. There's no room for weakness down here. Those who don't work, don't eat. And those who don't eat," He left the sentence unfinished, but the threat hung heavy in the air. Meanwhile, back on the surface, Tempest hadn't moved from the mine entrance. The horse stood there, still as a statue, his ears pricked for any sound that might come from the depths. A few passing miners commented on the animal's strange behavior, but no one bothered to look into it further. Jeremiah watched the horse from a distance, a growing unease in his chest. He had worked with animals long enough to know they often sense things that humans missed. Tempest's agitation was not normal, and it made him all the more disturbed by McKenna's decision. In the gallery, Morton was explaining the work to the boys with a chilling coldness. "You'll go into these small tunnels and look for gold veins. Anything that shines, any rock that looks different, you bring to me. Don't try to hide anything, because I'll search you when you come out." Thomas looked at the tunnel Morton was indicating. It was so narrow that a grown man could barely fit on his knees, and it descended at a steep angle into total blackness. The air coming from it was even heavier, laden with gases that made their eyes water. "Can't we work together?" Thomas asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Of course not," Morton answered impatiently. "You'll take separate tunnels. That way you're more productive and I can keep a better eye on you. No talking, no playing, just work." The thought of being separated from Samuel terrified Thomas more than the prospect of the dangerous work. They had never spent more than a few hours apart in their entire lives, and now they would face this nightmare alone. Samuel began to shake, not just from the cold, but from pure fear. "Thomas," he whispered, "I don't want to be alone in the dark." "Me neither," Thomas admitted, swallowing his own tears. "But we'll be brave. We'll think of each other, and it will be like we're together." Morton was losing his patience. "Enough talk. You," he said, shoving Thomas toward one tunnel. "Go that way. And you," he continued, pointing Samuel to the other. "Go that way. I want you back with something by the end of the day, or you'll spend the night down here with no food." As Thomas reluctantly shuffled toward his assigned tunnel, Samuel felt as if a part of his soul was being torn away. The echo of his brother's footsteps faded quickly, swallowed by the mine's ravenous darkness. Up above, Tempest let out a low, mournful whinny, as if he could feel the boys' separation. The horse began to pace in circles near the mine entrance, his eyes fixed on the darkness that had consumed the two children he had come to protect. And in the depths of the earth, two 4-year-old boys began their descent into hell, not knowing if they would ever see the light of day again. The hours dragged on like an eternity in the bowels of the earth. Thomas crawled through the narrow passage, his small hands already bleeding from the sharp rocks, as he tried to find something to satisfy Morton. The tiny lantern he'd been given barely lit 2 feet ahead, and with every movement, sinister shadows danced on the walls like demons mocking his despair. In the other tunnel, Samuel cried softly as he dug with his bare hands. His fingernails were broken and his palms were raw, but he kept going, driven by fear of the consequences if he returned empty-handed. The sound of his ragged breath echoed through the tight space, mingling with the steady drip of water seeping from the walls. "Thomas," Samuel whispered into the void, hoping his brother could somehow hear him. "Where are you? I'm so scared." The only answer was the echo of his own voice, distorted and ghostly, returning from the depths like a supernatural wail. Samuel flinched, imagining it was the voice of some spirit lost in the mines, and worked faster, desperate to leave the haunted place. Up in the camp, Jeremiah couldn't focus on his work. He walked nervously among the miners, checking production with less attention than usual, his thoughts constantly returning to the 2 boys who had been taken into the depths. With every passing hour, his conscience grew heavier, reminding him of his own children playing freely back home. "Foreman," one of the workers called out, "are you all right? You seem worried." Jeremiah looked at the man. It was Rodriguez, an honest Mexican man who had been at the mine for 3 years. He had always been quiet and dependable, someone who kept his head down and did his job without question. But there was something in his eyes at that moment, a concern that mirrored Jeremiah's own. "It's about the boys, isn't it?" Rodriguez asked in a low voice, glancing around to make sure no one else could hear. "This ain't right, Foreman. They're too little to be down there." Jeremiah felt a strange sense of relief, realizing he wasn't the only one troubled by the situation. "McKenna made his choice," he said carefully. "It's not our decision. But we could do something," Rodriguez insisted. "My cousin works as a deputy in the next town. He's an honest man, not like the others McKenna buys with his dirty money." The suggestion made Jeremiah's heart race. He knew that crossing McKenna was practically a death sentence, but the image of those boys being dragged into the darkness wouldn't leave his mind. "It's too dangerous," he muttered. "McKenna has eyes and ears everywhere." While the two men spoke in hushed tones, Tempest continued his silent vigil near the mine entrance. The horse had positioned himself so he could watch both the main entrance and the emergency exit on the other side of the hill. His instincts told him something terrible was happening, and he would not move until he knew the boys were safe. In the depths, Thomas finally found a small rock that glittered faintly in his lantern light. It wasn't gold. He knew that, even at his young age, but maybe it would be enough to convince Morton he had worked hard. His hands shook with exhaustion as he clutched the rock, and for a moment he allowed himself to rest against the tunnel's damp wall. "Samuel," he called out softly, knowing his brother couldn't hear him, but needing to feel some connection. "I'm trying to be strong. Mama always said we have to look out for each other." The memory of Maria brought tears to his eyes. How was she feeling right now? Did she know where they were? Was she looking for them? The longing hurt more than the cuts on his hands, more than the hunger gnawing at his empty stomach. Samuel, for his part, had found a few fragments of quartz that reflected his lantern light. He carefully tucked them into the torn pocket of his shirt, hoping they would be enough to avoid the punishment Morton had promised. His small lungs burned from the mine's dust and fumes, and he began to cough uncontrollably. "Please," he whispered to the rocks around him, as if they could hear, "let me find my brother. Let us get out of here." In the camp, the sun began to set. You're painting the sky in shades of red and orange that contrasted sharply with the darkness enveloping the boys in the depths. McKenna had left hours ago, satisfied with his cruel transaction, without so much as a backward glance. But Tempest remained, and Jeremiah felt the weight of a decision drawing near. Rodriguez had planted a seed of possibility, and it was growing fast in his guilt-ridden heart. Night fell over the camp like a heavy shroud, bringing with it a biting desert cold that was a cruel contrast to the day's scorching heat. Deep in the mine, Thomas and Samuel were finally allowed out of their hellish tunnels, their small figures stumbling into the main gallery where Morton awaited them with a stern expression. "Let's see what you've got," Morton said, holding out a grimy hand, "and it had better be something of value, or you'll learn what it really means to go hungry." Thomas handed over his shiny rock with trembling hands, trying not to show how exhausted he was. Samuel did the same with his quartz fragments, the two brothers instinctively moving closer to each other after hours of terrifying separation. Morton examined their finds under the weak light of his lantern, frowning. "This isn't gold," he grumbled, but then sighed. "But it's something. For today, you've earned a meal. Tomorrow, I expect more, much more." He led them out of the mine, where the night air hit their lungs like a blessing. Thomas and Samuel breathed deeply, feeling dizzy from the sudden rush of clean oxygen. Their clothes were torn and filthy, their faces covered in soot that made them look like small ghosts emerging from the underworld. Tempest immediately trotted over when he saw the boys, nickering softly and nuzzling each of them as if checking for injuries. Samuel clung to the horse's neck, finally allowing himself to cry openly. "He was waiting for us," Samuel whispered to Thomas, "the whole time." Across the yard, Jeremiah watched the scene with a heavy heart. All day, He had wrestled with himself, weighing the risks of defying McKenna against the impossibility of ignoring the children's suffering. The decision he'd made had kept him awake, tossing and turning in his makeshift bed. Rodriguez approached Jeremiah discreetly once most of the workers had turned in for the night. "Foreman," he murmured, "I sent a message to my cousin in town, told him about the boys, about what's happening here." Jeremiah felt a mix of relief and terror. "You did what?" "Rodriguez, if McKenna finds out—" "He won't," Rodriguez interrupted with determination. "My cousin is discreet, and he's a man of his word. He said he'll come investigate. But we need to keep them alive until then." In the small area where Morton had chained the boys for the night, a cruel shadow of the pen where they'd been sold, Thomas and Samuel huddled together for warmth. They had been given a bowl of thin gruel and dirty water, but it was more food than they had expected after such a terrible day. "Thomas," Samuel whispered, "do you think Mama knows where we are?" Thomas hesitated, not wanting to lie to his brother, but not wanting to destroy the small hope that remained in their hearts either. "I think she's looking for us," he finally said, "and I think she'll find us. How? I don't know, but mothers always find their children. It's like magic." Samuel smiled for the first time in days, clinging to that promise like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. "And until then, we stay together. Always together," Thomas promised, squeezing his brother's hand. No matter what, Tempest lay down near the children, his large body offering some protection from the cold night wind. The horse remained alert, his ears twitching at every sound, ready to defend the boys if needed. Jeremiah spent much of the night pacing the camp, checking on security, but mostly battling his conscience. He had served McKenna faithfully for years, but there were limits to what a man could witness and still be able to look at himself in the mirror. As dawn approached, painting the horizon in soft shades of pink and gold, a decision had crystallized in his mind. He found Rodriguez near the cook fires where the miners were preparing their morning meal. "Your cousin," Jeremiah said in a low voice. "When did he say he was coming?" "A few days, at most," Rodriguez replied. "But Foreman, we have to protect the boys until then. Morton is planning to take them even deeper into the mine today. I heard him talking to the other thugs." Jeremiah looked toward the spot where Thomas and Samuel slept, still huddled together, their small forms looking even smaller in the harsh vastness of the camp. The rising sun illuminated their innocent faces, and for a moment they looked like just two normal children having peaceful dreams. "Then we have to buy them time," Jeremiah said, his voice filled with a newfound resolve. "And if that means defying orders, so be it." Rodriguez smiled for the first time in days. "Do you have a plan?" Jeremiah glanced at Tempest, who had raised his head and was watching them with those intelligent eyes, as if he understood something important was being decided. "I'm starting to get one," Jeremiah replied, "and we're going to need all the help we can get." The second day in the mines was even more brutal than the first. Morton had made good on his threat to take the boys into deeper tunnels, where the air was so thin they could barely breathe, and the darkness so complete their small lanterns seemed like candles flickering in the wind. Thomas had fainted twice, and Samuel was coughing up blood, but Morton remained relentless. "Get back in there and bring me something of value, or you won't see food for the next 3 days, he threatened, shoving Samuel back toward a tunnel that sloped down at a dangerous angle. It was at this critical moment that something extraordinary happened. Tempest, who had been watching from the mine entrance, made a decision that would change the course of the entire story. The horse was not just an ordinary animal. He possessed an intelligence and loyalty that transcended normal instinct. He had grown up with Maria's family, knew every corner of the region, and most importantly, he knew exactly where she lived. With a whinny that echoed through the tunnels like a battle cry, Tempest bolted from the camp. His white mane flew in the wind as he galloped across the desert, following trails he knew by heart. Some miners shouted, trying to stop him, but the horse was too fast, driven by a determination that seemed almost supernatural. In the nearby town of Silver Creek, Maria Vargas sat on the porch of her small home, staring blankly at the dusty road. 3 days had passed since she had given Thomas and Samuel to McKenna, and her heart was shattered with regret. She had believed the rich man's promises, thinking he would give the boys a better life than she ever could. "My babies," she whispered, tears rolling down her thin cheeks. "What have I done to you? How could I have been so naive?" It was then that she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching rapidly. Tempest appeared on the horizon like a vision, his white coat gleaming in the harsh sun. The horse was clearly agitated, sweaty and panting, but his eyes shone with an urgency Maria recognized immediately. "Tempest!" she cried, running toward the animal. "What happened? Where are my boys?" The horse began to circle her, whinnying desperately, clearly trying to communicate something important. Maria had grown up on a farm and knew how to read animals better than most. Tempest's agitation wasn't normal. It was a cry for help. "They're in danger, aren't they?" she asked, her voice breaking. "McKenna lied to me." Tempest moved closer and lowered his head, nuzzling Maria's shoulder. Then, astonishingly, he knelt, a behavior Maria recognized. He was inviting her to ride him. "You want to take me to them?" Maria understood, feeling a mix of hope and terror. "But I have no money to face McKenna, no power." At that moment, Maria's neighbor, an old man named Don Pedro, approached, having heard the commotion. He knew Tempest well and was intrigued by the animal's behavior. "Maria," he said, "that horse is trying to tell you something important, and I know someone who can help." "Who?" "Sheriff Castellanos. He's not like the others McKenna buys. He's an honest man, and he's been investigating the illegal activities at that camp for months. If your sons are in danger—" Maria felt a spark of hope for the first time in days. "You think he would help us?" "I'm sure of it," Don Pedro replied. "He has children of his own, and if there's one thing I know about Castellanos, it's that he doesn't stand for injustice against children." Meanwhile, back at the camp, Tempest's absence was quickly noticed. Morton was furious, shouting at anyone who would listen. "Where is that damned horse? He could ruin everything if he gets to town." Jeremiah felt his heart pound. If Tempest had truly gone for help, this could be the salvation the boys needed. But it also meant time was running out. McKenna would soon know something was wrong. "Rodriguez," he called out discreetly, "we need to protect the boys, now." Deep in the mine, Thomas and Samuel continued their forced labor, unaware that their salvation was galloping across the desert in the form of a courageous white horse. They communicated in whispers when Morton wasn't around, keeping alive the hope that somehow, somewhere, someone would come to their rescue. "I dreamed of Mama last night," Samuel told Thomas. "She was riding a white horse, coming to get us." Thomas smiled faintly. "Maybe it wasn't a dream," he said. "Maybe it was a glimpse of the future." And on the dusty road leading to town, Tempest was already beginning his return journey, this time carrying on his back not only Maria, but also the hope that justice would finally prevail over cruelty. Maria Vargas had never ridden so fast in her life. Her fingers clutched Tempest's mane as they flew across the rocky trails leading to the sheriff's office in Silver Creek. The wind whipped at her face, drying the tears that wouldn't stop falling. But in her eyes burned a fierce determination she never knew she possessed. "Please, God," she muttered as they rode, "don't let it be too late. Let my babies be all right." The sheriff's office was a low adobe building in the center of the small town, marked only by a faded sign that swung in the wind. Maria slid off Tempest in a hurry, nearly tripping over her skirts, and burst through the door without even knocking. Sheriff Eduardo Castellanos looked up from the papers he was studying, surprised by the abrupt entrance. He was a middle-aged man with salt-and-pepper hair and dark eyes that held both kindness and resolve. He had served as the law in this territory for over 15 years, constantly fighting against the corruption that McKenna spread like a plague. "Ma'am," he said, rising politely, "how can I help you?" "My sons," Maria said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Donovan McKenna has my sons, and they're in terrible danger." The name McKenna made Castellanos' expression harden. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to a chair, "and tell me everything from the beginning." Maria told her story between sobs, from the day she'd met McKenna 4 years earlier to the desperate moment she had handed Thomas and Samuel over to his care. Castellanos listened in silence, his jaw tightening with every revealed detail. "I received a message 2 days ago," Castellanos said when Maria had finished, "from a man named Rodriguez who works at the camp. He said children were being mistreated but didn't give specifics. Now I understand why." "So you'll help?" Maria asked, gripping the edge of the desk as if her life depended on it. "I'll do more than that," Castellanos replied, already standing and grabbing his hat and sidearm. "I'm going to round up some trusted men, and we're riding out there right now. McKenna may have money and influence, but he's not above the law." As Castellanos organized a posse, including Don Pedro and 2 other townsmen known for their integrity, Maria stood beside Tempest, stroking the neck of the horse who had been her salvation. "You're a hero," she whispered to the animal. "You brought help for my babies when I couldn't see a way out." Back at the camp, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Morton had decided the boys weren't producing enough and ordered them taken to the most dangerous gallery in the mine, a tunnel known for frequent cave-ins and toxic gases. "No," Thomas protested as Morton began dragging them toward the ominous entrance. "Please, we'll work harder, we promise." "Too late," Morton snarled. "You're useless. And if you can't work right, you can at least serve to test if the new tunnels are safe." Jeremiah, who had been watching from afar, could no longer stand by. His conscience finally overcame his fear of McKenna, and he strode toward the group. "Morton," he said with authority, "I'm the foreman here, and I say these children are not going into that gallery." Morton spun around, surprised. "Since when do you care about a couple of bastard whelps? McKenna made it clear they're my responsibility." "McKenna isn't here," Jeremiah retorted, placing himself between Morton and the boys. "And as long as he's not, I'm in charge of this camp." The tension in the air was palpable. Other miners began to gather, some secretly supporting Jeremiah, others fearing the consequences of challenging the established authority. Rodriguez moved to stand beside Jeremiah, and gradually a few more men did the same. Samuel clung to Thomas's arm, whispering, "Someone's standing up for us." "Yes," Thomas replied, feeling a flicker of hope. "Maybe there are still good people in the world." Morton realized he was losing control of the situation. He pulled a pistol from its holster, aiming it directly at Jeremiah. "You're not going to ruin my plans over 2 worthless brats." "Put the gun down," Jeremiah said calmly, though his heart was hammering. "It doesn't have to be this way." It was at this moment of peak tension that the sound of galloping horses echoed through the camp. Everyone turned to see a cloud of dust approaching rapidly. Castellanos and his posse were arriving, with Maria on Tempest leading the charge. "The sheriff!" someone shouted, and panic spread among McKenna's thugs. Morton hesitated for a second, his gun still aimed at Jeremiah, but it was long enough. Rodriguez moved swiftly, tackling him before he could fire. The gun flew from his grasp, and Morton fell hard into the dusty ground. Maria dismounted Tempest before the horse had even come to a full stop, running toward her sons with open arms. "Thomas! Samuel!" she cried, and the boys ran into her embrace, weeping with relief and joy. The reunion was emotional, but Castellanos knew the work was just beginning. McKenna was still at large, and they needed solid evidence to ensure justice was served. The relief of the reunion lasted only a few precious moments. Maria was kneeling in the dust, hugging Thomas and Samuel as if to shield them from all the evil in the world, when the ominous sound of an approaching carriage made everyone look toward the main road. Sheriff Castellanos narrowed his eyes, immediately recognizing the luxurious coach speeding toward them. "McKenna," he muttered, his hand going to the pistol at his hip. "He's back." The stagecoach screeched to a halt in the center of the yard, kicking up a cloud of red dust. Donovan McKenna stepped out with the arrogance of a king returning to his domain, but his cold eyes quickly took in the unusual scene. The sheriff and his men, Maria holding her children, Morton being restrained by Rodriguez, and Jeremiah standing in a clear posture of defiance. "What is the meaning of this?" McKenna demanded, his voice cutting the air like a frozen blade. "Sheriff, I trust you have a very good explanation for trespassing on my property." Castellanos stepped forward, his posture straight and authoritative. "Donovan McKenna, you're being accused of child trafficking, forced child labor, and cruelty to children. These are very serious charges." McKenna laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Accusations, based on what? The word of ignorant minors and a desperate woman." He gestured dismissively toward Maria. "I purchased these children legally. She signed them over to me herself in exchange for money." "That's a lie," Maria burst out, standing with her sons still clinging to her skirts. "You said you would care for them, give them a better life. You didn't say you would sell them like slaves." "Proof," McKenna said coldly, pulling a paper from his waistcoat pocket. "Here is the document she signed, transferring custody of the children to me. Entirely legal." Castellanos examined the document, his expression growing grimmer. The paper looked official, with Maria's trembling signature at the bottom. McKenna had been careful, covering his legal bases before carrying out his cruel plan. "Even if this is valid," Castellanos said after a moment, "it does not give you the right to subject children to forced labor in dangerous conditions." "Forced labor?" McKenna feigned outrage. "I was teaching them an honest trade. Mining is a respectable profession in this territory." Thomas, who had been silent until now, pulled away from his mother and walked bravely toward McKenna. His blue eyes shone with a determination that was remarkable in one so young. "You're not our father," he said, his voice small but firm. "A real father wouldn't sell his own children. A real father would protect his children." McKenna's face twisted in anger. "I have no sons," he said through gritted teeth, "and I certainly have no filthy bastards like you." "But you do," Thomas insisted, and Samuel joined him, the two brothers united in their courage. "And everyone here knows it. You're ashamed of us because we're poor, but we're your sons all the same." The unintentional confession echoed across the yard. Several miners who had witnessed the sale of the children began to mutter among themselves, confirming the boy's words. McKenna realized too late that he'd been cornered by his own arrogance. "Witnesses," Castellanos said with satisfaction. "Jeremiah, Rodriguez, did you witness the events of the last few days?" "Yes, sir," Jeremiah answered, finding a courage he never knew he had. "I saw Mr. McKenna bring these children here, put them in a pen like animals, and sell them to Morton for $1. And I saw Morton force them to work in dangerous tunnels," Rodriguez added. "Tunnels where grown men refused to go." McKenna felt his control of the situation slipping through his fingers. He looked around for support from his henchmen, but many had quietly disappeared when the sheriff arrived. Only a few men remained, and they seemed more interested in saving their own skins than defending him. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," McKenna said, his voice taking on a threatening tone. "I have influence all over this territory. I can ruin any one of you with a single telegram. Your threats don't work anymore," Castellanos replied calmly. "And as for your influence, well, we'll see how much it's worth when you're behind bars." McKenna took a few steps back, his eyes rapidly calculating his options. He was surrounded, but not beaten. Men like him always had an escape plan, always kept an ace up their sleeve for moments like this. "Very well," he said finally, forcing a cold smile. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. I am willing to compensate generously for any misunderstanding that may have occurred, but Castellanos had seen that tactic before. The only arrangement you'll be making is with a judge, he said, signaling for his men to move in. Donovan McKenna, you are under arrest. And it was then that McKenna showed his true nature, pulling a hidden derringer and aiming it directly at Thomas and Samuel. If anyone moves, he said, his voice laced with venom, these children die. The silence that followed McKenna's threat was absolute and terrifying. Maria felt as if the entire world had stopped breathing. Thomas and Samuel, who had shown such courage moments before, were now frozen in fear, staring at the barrel of the gun McKenna aimed in their direction. "That's right," McKenna said, his voice taking on a tone of cruel triumph. "Now all of you are going to listen to me very carefully. Sheriff, order your men to lower their weapons and back away. Jeremiah, Rodriguez, get back to work as if nothing happened." Castellanos hesitated, his hands trembling slightly. He had faced many dangerous situations in his years as a lawman, but never one where innocent children were used as human shields. "McKenna," he said carefully, "don't make this worse for yourself. Let the children go, and we can negotiate." "There is no negotiation," McKenna screamed, his mask of civility finally shattering completely. "You invaded my property, you questioned my authority, and now you will pay the consequences." It was in this moment of extreme tension that Tempest, who had remained seemingly calm near the stagecoach, began to move. The horse had been watching the situation with his keen intelligence, assessing every movement, every raised voice, every threatening gesture. His protective instincts, which had driven him to seek help for the children, now spurred him to more direct action. McKenna was so focused on holding everyone at gunpoint that he didn't notice Tempest begin to approach silently from behind. The horse moved with the grace of a predator, each step calculated to make no sound on the dusty earth. "Maria," McKenna continued, without taking his eyes off Castellanos, "you will go back to your miserable little shack and pretend none of this ever happened. And if you ever try to speak of these bastards again—" He never finished the sentence. Tempest, in an explosive movement that stunned everyone, reared up on his hind legs and brought his front hooves down on McKenna in a powerful strike. The gun flew from his hand, spinning through the air before landing in the dust several feet away. McKenna fell heavily, the air knocked from his lungs with a guttural gasp. Before he could recover, Tempest planted a hoof on his chest, pinning him to the ground. The horse whinnied low, a sound that seemed a mixture of triumph and warning. "Now!" Castellanos shouted, and his men moved in swiftly to surround McKenna. In seconds, the man who had terrorized the camp was in handcuffs, utterly defeated. Maria ran to Thomas and Samuel, wrapping them in a protective embrace. "It's all right," she whispered, tears of relief streaming down her cheeks. "It's over." "It's all right now." Samuel looked at Tempest in absolute awe. "He saved us," he said, his voice full of wonder. "The horse really saved us." Thomas walked over to Tempest, who had stepped back from McKenna as soon as the sheriff's men took control. The boy placed his small hands on the horse's muzzle, looking directly into his intelligent eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. "You're the bravest animal in the whole world." Tempest lowered his head, gently nuzzling the boy's face as if he understood the words of gratitude perfectly. McKenna, still gasping on the ground, tried to maintain some shred of his former arrogance. "You don't know what you've done," he rasped. "I have powerful friends. I'll be out of jail in days, and when you are," Castellanos interrupted, "you'll find your threats have no power anymore. We have enough witnesses to make sure you spend a very long time behind bars." Jeremiah approached the group, carrying a heavy sack he'd taken from one of the camp offices. "Sheriff," he said, "I found this in McKenna's safe. It's money, a lot of it. Probably the profits from all the illegal schemes he was running here." "That's mine by right," McKenna protested. I worked for years to build this business. Built with forced labor and exploitation, Castellanos retorted. This money will be used to compensate your victims and to ensure that children like Thomas and Samuel never have to endure what they went through again. Rodriguez joined them, carrying more proof of McKenna's crimes. We found ledgers, he said, documents showing how many children were sold, how many workers were exploited. It's enough to keep McKenna in prison for decades. Maria looked at the man who had nearly destroyed her family and felt a mixture of anger and pity. Why? She asked. Why would you do this to innocent children, to your own sons? McKenna stared back at her with empty eyes. Because they were a stain on my reputation, he said coldly. And I don't tolerate stains. Then you lost the only thing that truly matters in life, Maria replied sadly. You lost the chance to know these wonderful boys, to be a real father. As McKenna was led away to the coach that would transport him to jail, Thomas and Samuel stood beside Tempest, stroking his white mane. The horse had become more than a pet. He was a member of their family, a hero who had risked everything to protect them. Are we going home? Samuel asked, looking up at his mother with hope. Yes, Maria replied, smiling through her tears. We're all going home. Together. 3 weeks passed since McKenna's arrest, and the Blackstone mining camp had been completely transformed. Where fear and exploitation had once reigned, cooperation and human dignity now flourished. Jeremiah, promoted by Sheriff Castellanos to be the temporary administrator, worked tirelessly to implement changes that had seemed impossible just a month before. I can't believe how this place has changed, Rodriguez commented, watching miners who now worked fair shifts with proper safety equipment and regular breaks. It's like a whole new camp. Maria had decided to remain in the region for a few weeks, helping with the transition and ensuring that other families who had been wronged by McKenna received the assistance they needed. She set up a small, makeshift school in one of the old administrative shacks, where she taught the workers, children, how to read and write. Thomas and Samuel had become minor celebrities in the camp. Their courage in confronting McKenna had inspired many of the adults to speak out about the abuses they had witnessed or suffered. The boys, once symbols of suffering, now represented hope and renewal. Mr. Rodriguez, said Thomas during one of the makeshift lessons, do you think our father, that Mr. McKenna, will be in prison for a long time? Rodriguez, who had volunteered to help with the children's education in his spare time, thought carefully before answering. Sheriff Castellanos said the evidence is very strong. He will likely be imprisoned for many years. I feel sad for him, Samuel admitted, surprising everyone. Not for what he did, but because he chose to be bad when he could have been good. The wisdom in the 4-year-old's words deeply touched the adults present. Maria felt immense pride, realizing that despite everything they had been through, her sons had kept their capacity to forgive and to see the good even in the darkest of situations. Tempest had become the unofficial mascot of the entire camp. The horse roamed freely among the workers, who treated him with the respect due a hero. Many left carrots and apples in his path, and there was always someone willing to brush his white coat until it gleamed like polished silver. Sheriff Castellanos visited the camp regularly, overseeing the changes and gathering more evidence for McKenna's trial. During one of these visits, he brought news that changed everything for Maria and her sons. The money we found in McKenna's safe, he announced at a meeting with Maria, Jeremiah, and Rodriguez, has been officially seized by the court. Part of it will be used to improve working conditions here at the camp. But a significant portion has been allocated specifically to you and your children. Maria turned pale. I don't understand. How much money? Enough to ensure Thomas and Samuel get a proper education, that you have a decent home, and that you will never be in need again, Castellanos replied with a warm smile. It's a form of poetic justice. The money McKenna earned through cruelty will now be used to create something beautiful. Tears began to stream down Maria's cheeks. All her life, she had fought against poverty, working exhausting jobs just to survive. The idea that her sons could have opportunities she never had was almost impossible to believe. "But there is one condition," Castellanos added. "The court wants you to remain in the region for at least a year, helping other families who may have been harmed by similar schemes. Would you be willing to do that?" "Of course," Maria answered without hesitation. "If I can help other mothers protect their children, I will do it with all my heart." Jeremiah leaned forward, an idea shining in his eyes. "Actually," he said, "I have a proposal. What if we turn part of this camp into a permanent school? Maria could be the head teacher, and we could educate not only the workers' children, but also children from neighboring communities who have never had access to schooling." The idea was met with enthusiasm from everyone present. Rodriguez offered to be Maria's assistant, using his reading and writing skills to help the more advanced students. Other miners, inspired by the example, volunteered to teach practical skills like carpentry and blacksmithing. That night, as the sun set over the distant mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold and red, Maria sat outside her new home, a simple but comfortable house the workers had built for her and the boys. Thomas and Samuel played nearby, their laughter echoing in the clean desert air. Tempest ambled over and lay down near the small group, his presence as comforting as ever. Maria stroked his mane, thinking about how drastically life could change in a matter of weeks. "Mama," said Thomas, interrupting her thoughts, "do you think we're a happy family now?" Maria looked at her sons, then at Tempest, and finally at the camp that had transformed from a place of suffering into a place of hope. "Yes, my love," she replied, smiling genuinely for the first time in years. "I think we are finally a truly happy family." 6 months after his arrest, Donovan McKenna sat in a cold, damp cell in Red Rock Penitentiary, staring at the iron bars that separated him from freedom. His empire had completely crumbled. The mines were permanently closed after an investigation revealed decades of safety violations. His assets were seized, and his reputation was ruined forever. But what tormented him most was not the prison conditions or the loss of his fortune. It was the image he couldn't get out of his mind. Thomas and Samuel, his own sons, looking at him with a mixture of fear and disappointment that haunted him day and night. For the first time in his adult life, McKenna was confronting something that money couldn't buy and power couldn't control: his conscience. "Visitor for you, McKenna," a guard announced, the cell door creaking open. McKenna looked up, expecting his lawyer or perhaps a former associate trying to salvage their own business. Instead, he was shocked to see Maria Vargas walking down the prison corridor, carrying a small basket covered with a white cloth. "What are you doing here?" he asked, genuinely surprised. Maria sat in the chair on the other side of the bars, studying the man who had nearly destroyed her family. He looked different, thinner, with graying hair he once kept perfectly coiffed, and something in his eyes she had never seen before: vulnerability. "I came because Thomas and Samuel asked me to," she replied calmly. "They said they wanted me to bring you this." She uncovered the basket, revealing homemade cookies, fresh fruit, and a letter written in the uneven, childish script of children still learning to write. McKenna took the letter with trembling hands, reading the simple words that struck him like physical blows. "Dear Father, we hope you are okay in prison. Mama said we should forgive people who hurt us, so we forgive you. We hope you learn to be a good person. Love, Thomas and Samuel." Tears began to stream down McKenna's face, the first tears he had shed since childhood. "Why?" he asked in a broken voice. "Why would they do this after everything I did?" "Because they are your sons," Maria answered simply. "And children have a capacity for forgiveness that we adults often lose. They can't understand your cruelty, but they also can't stop loving you." McKenna clutched the letter to his chest, sobbing openly. "I sold them," he whispered. "I sold my own sons as if they were livestock. What kind of man does that?" "A man who lost his way," Maria said, and to her own surprise, she felt pity for him. "But maybe it's not too late to find it again." "It is too late," McKenna protested. "I destroyed everything. They can never truly forgive me, and I don't deserve it anyway." "Forgiveness isn't about deserving it," Maria explained patiently. "It's about freedom. Thomas and Samuel taught me that when they forgave you, they freed themselves from the hatred that could have poisoned their hearts for the rest of their lives." McKenna looked at her through the bars, seeing for the first time the strong, wise woman he had scorned for her poverty. "How can you be here talking to me after what I did to your children?" "Because I've learned to forgive too," Maria replied. "Not for your actions, which were unforgivable, but for the person you could become if you truly repented." "And if I wanted to change?" McKenna asked hesitantly. "If I wanted to somehow make up for the harm I've caused?" Maria leaned forward. "The lawyer said your trial is next week. You could use that opportunity to publicly admit your crimes, to help other victims find justice, to show that you are truly sorry. That would only increase my sentence." "Probably," Maria agreed. "But it might also save your soul." McKenna was silent for a long moment, processing her words. "The boys, how are they?" "They are growing up strong and happy," Maria replied with a smile. "Thomas wants to be a teacher like me, and Samuel dreams of being a veterinarian to care for animals like Tempest. They attend the school we started at the old camp, and they have many friends." "And do they ever ask about me?" "Often," Maria admitted. "They want to understand why you did what you did. I tell them that sometimes people make terrible choices when they are lost, but that there is always hope for change." McKenna held the letter tighter. Tell them I'm sorry, that I wish I could go back in time and be the father they deserved from the beginning." "Why don't you tell them yourself?" Maria suggested. "They would like to visit you, if you want to see them." The thought of seeing Thomas and Samuel again both terrified and thrilled McKenna. "I don't know if I have the courage to look them in the eye after what I did." "Courage is exactly what you need to find," Maria said, rising to leave. "And maybe when you find it, you'll discover that it's never too late to start being the man your sons believe you can become." As Maria left, McKenna remained clutching the letter, finally understanding what he had lost when he chose pride over love, power over fatherhood. The courthouse in Silver Creek was packed on the day of Donovan McKenna's trial. Reporters from several nearby towns had come to cover the case that had shocked the entire territory, and many of McKenna's victims were present to finally see justice served. Maria sat in the front row with Thomas and Samuel, who had insisted on being there despite their young age. McKenna entered the courtroom in shackles, but he walked tall. In the days following Maria's visit, he had made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. His lawyers had tried to talk him out of it, but he was determined to follow the advice Maria had given him about courage and repentance. "Your Honor," McKenna said when the judge gave him the floor, "I would like to change my plea to guilty on all charges." A murmur of surprise rippled through the courtroom. His lawyers looked desperate, but McKenna continued. "More than that, I would like to make a full statement about all the crimes I have committed, including some that have not yet been discovered. I exploited workers, I sold children, I bribed officials, and I have caused immeasurable suffering to dozens of families over the years." The judge, a seasoned man who was rarely surprised, raised his eyebrows. "Mr. McKenna, do you understand that these admissions could result in a much harsher sentence?" "I do, Your Honor, and I accept whatever punishment you deem appropriate." McKenna then turned to the gallery, his eyes finding Thomas and Samuel's. "But before I receive my sentence, there is something I need to say to two very special people." He walked to where Maria was seated with the boys, kneeling on the courtroom floor before his sons. Thomas and Samuel watched him with large, curious eyes, without fear, only with the innocent expectation of children. "Thomas, Samuel," McKenna said, his voice trembling with emotion. I am your biological father, but I have never been a real father to you. A father protects his children, loves his children, sacrifices everything for them. I did the opposite of all those things. Tears streamed down his face as he continued. I sold you because I was ashamed of you, ashamed that you might tarnish my reputation. But the truth is, I was the stain on your lives. You are beautiful, brave, intelligent and kind, everything I should have been and wasn't. Thomas took a step forward, hesitantly touching McKenna's tear-streaked face. Why are you crying? Because I finally understand what I lost, McKenna answered. I lost the chance to know the most wonderful boys in the world. I lost the chance to be proud of you, to teach you good things, to watch you grow. Samuel joined his brother. You can learn to be a better father, he said, with the simple wisdom of a child. Mama always says it's never too late to learn new things. McKenna sobbed openly before the entire court. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope that one day, when you are older, you can understand that I love you. I always have, even when I was acting so terribly. We already forgave you, Thomas said simply, and we love you too. The hug that followed silenced the entire courtroom. There wasn't a dry eye in the room as they watched a man finally discover the paternal love he had denied for so long. When McKenna stood, he addressed the judge with a dignity he had never possessed when he was rich and powerful. Your Honor, I would like to donate all my remaining assets to a fund to help children in situations similar to the one I put my own sons in, and I would like to spend the rest of my sentence working to repair the damage I've caused. The judge, visibly moved, declared a sentence of 15 years in prison, but with the possibility of parole based on rehabilitative work and exemplary behavior. More importantly, he established the fund McKenna had proposed, ensuring his ill-gotten wealth would be used to protect other children. When McKenna was led back to his cell that night, he carried with him something money had never given him, inner peace. For the first time in his adult life, he had done the right thing, had put the well-being of others above his own self-interest. Maria visited him one last time before leaving for her new life. The boys wanted me to give you this, she said, handing him a drawing made by Thomas and Samuel. It was a simple picture of a family, a mother, 2 boys, a white horse, and a man who, even from behind prison bars, was smiling. They said that when you get out of prison, if you've really changed, there will always be a place for you in our family, Maria explained. McKenna held the drawing as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. I will spend every day working to deserve that chance, he promised. And for the first time since Maria had known him, she believed his words completely. 1 year later, the old Blackstone mining camp had transformed into something no one could have imagined. Where miserable shacks and dangerous tunnels once stood, a small, thriving community known as Hope's Landing now flourished. The school Maria had founded had grown to serve over 50 children from neighboring communities. And Jeremiah had established carpentry and blacksmithing workshops that taught honorable trades to the region's youth. Thomas and Samuel, now 5, ran through the schoolyards with the boundless energy of a happy childhood. Their sun-kissed faces radiated the confidence of children who knew they were loved and protected. They had become little leaders among their peers, always ready to help the younger ones and share their stories of overcoming hardship. Mr. Rodriguez, Thomas called out during a math lesson. When are we going to visit our father in prison again? Rodriguez smiled, hearing the naturalness with which the boy referred to McKenna. The children's capacity for forgiveness continued to amaze all the adults around them. Next month, he replied. Your mother said he's working very hard on a program to help other prisoners learn to read. He's learning to be a good person, Samuel added with conviction. Mama says everyone can change if they really want to. The wisdom in those childish words echoed through the classroom, reminding everyone present of the transformative power of forgiveness and second chances. Outside, Tempest grazed peacefully in a meadow that had been created specifically for him. The white horse had become a living legend in the region, and children from distant towns came just to meet the animal who had saved Thomas and Samuel. He seemed to understand his fame and accepted the attention with the dignity of a true hero. Maria watched it all from the porch of her new home, a modest but comfortable house that the villagers had built for her with love and gratitude. She wore a simple but clean dress, her hair tied back with a colorful ribbon Samuel had given her as a gift. Her hands, once rough from hard labor, now bore only the soft marks of a dedicated teacher. "Letter for you, Teacher Maria," announced Don Pedro, handing her an envelope with the official seal of the penitentiary. Maria opened it carefully, immediately recognizing McKenna's improved handwriting. He had been practicing his penmanship as part of his rehabilitation program, and his letters had grown more eloquent with each passing month. "Dearest Maria," the letter read, "I hope you and the boys are well. I wanted you to know that the literacy program here at the prison is a great success. I have already taught 15 men to read, and 3 of them are now helping other inmates. The warden said this is the most successful rehabilitation project they have ever had." The letter continued, "I know I still have much to learn about being a good man, but every day I feel I'm getting closer to becoming the father Thomas and Samuel deserve. The prison psychologist says my transformation is genuine and that I'm developing real empathy for the first time in my adult life." Maria smiled as she read the words. McKenna's letters had evolved from desperate pleas for forgiveness to sincere reports of personal growth and plans for the future. "The judge said I can apply for parole in 3 years if I continue to show progress." The letter went on. "I am not asking for a second chance with our family. I know I still need to prove I deserve that, but I want you to know that every day I spend here is dedicated to becoming worthy of the love you have all offered me." That afternoon, when the lessons were over, Maria sat with Thomas and Samuel under the shade of a tree they had planted together in their first month at the village. Tempest ambled over and lay down beside them, as he always did at the end of the day. "Boys," Maria said, "do you remember what our life was like a year ago?" Thomas thought for a moment. "We remember the bad parts," he said, "but we also remember that we always had you, and that Tempest saved us, and that good people like Jeremiah and Rodriguez helped us. And now we have a school and friends and a nice house," Samuel added, "and our father is learning to be better." Maria hugged her sons, feeling a profound gratitude for all they had achieved. They had begun this journey as victims of cruelty, but had emerged as symbols of hope and forgiveness. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, the small family rose to head home. Tempest followed them, as always, his white coat glowing in the soft twilight. "Mama," said Thomas, pausing to look back at the school and the community they had helped create, "do you think our story will have a happy ending?" Maria looked at her sons, then at the thriving village that had risen from the ashes of cruelty, and finally toward the horizon where the future awaited them with endless possibilities. "My love," she said, smiling with all the wisdom that suffering and overcoming had given her, "I think our story is just beginning." And as they walked toward the future, leaving footprints in the golden desert sand, Tempest whinnied softly, as if agreeing that the greatest adventures always begin when we learn that love and forgiveness are the most powerful forces in the world.